Okay, guys. Good afternoon. I hope you had a very good lunch. We are also joined by the live streamers, but it's great to see a few of you here. Very short about myself. Shoham, founder of Accelerator Frankfurt. It's the first accelerator in the city. Founded in 2015, and basically we're really helping fintech and cybersecurity companies get into the German financial industry. I'd be happy to talk later more with each of you if you want to learn more, but today we're talking about these guys, and I've had the pleasure of doing a few AML and fraud projects, but as I said earlier, if you heard, I'm no expert. So I really want to learn and ask questions that will help me learn, help some of the people here learn, and perhaps we also have some experts among us. What we will do is we'll shortly, Sjoerd, Krik, and Jaap will shortly introduce themselves. But then I will hand over to our police officer, Didier, here to introduce himself, but also give us a little bit more of an extensive scene of what's happening in the fraud industry. So, Sjoerd, perhaps take it away.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Welcome to the...
Works?
No, does it turn on? Push.
Here, speak from here.
We're still going. Yeah, it's on? Yeah, now it's on. Okay, cool. No, thanks. Welcome to, I guess, the Dutch-French party here. So I think we have a nice gathering of people. My name is Sjoerd Slot. I'm the founder of Sygno. We do automated model generation based on good customer behavior. So typically you try to hunt fraudsters. And what we actually do is we hunt the non-fraudsters in order to identify the fraudsters. So if you have a fraud, the fraud of today doesn't say a lot about the fraud of tomorrow. But the good customer of today says a lot about what your good customer probably will do tomorrow. So what we do is every bank has a transaction monitoring system, but needs to have some logic and says this is good and this is suspicious. And what we then do is we generate models for those monitoring systems that actually says this is good and this is something you probably want to look into. It might be fraud.
Thanks. Krik?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krik, co-founder and CEO at Fourthline. Fourthline is an Amsterdam headquartered tech company, but also a regulated financial institution. Means we've got a pretty good understanding of what it actually means and takes to comply with both anti-money laundering regulations as well as the privacy regulations. We initially built a system for in-house purposes because we looked at everything that was available in the market and didn't really think it would solve our problem to comply with those regulations. But once we completed that, a couple of financial institutions asked us whether they could use it on a standalone basis. We launched that in 2018. We're now operating on a pan-European basis. Both solving the challenge at initial onboarding, but also continuous KYC through a suite of products. We're verifying millions of users every year and very proud to have a partnership with the French National Police. I'm sure DJ will give a ton of interesting examples, but I think it's first over to Jaap.
See if this works. Yes, this works. Good afternoon. My name is Jaap van der Molen. I'm delighted to be here. I'm the head of compliance for AML and sanctions at ABN AMRO Bank. So I sit in the compliance on the compliance side. I own AML policies and sanctions policies that have to be implemented in the bank, and as such, we do a lot of work on identification and verification to make sure we know who our customers are. The basic stuff: first to manage the risks of potentially getting the wrong clients on board, and in the second instance also to meet regulatory requirements. So it should be a good discussion amongst these people. Over to you, DJ.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not speaking only on behalf of the French Police Nationale. I'm holding the position of the coordinator of the strategic goal fight against document fraud at EU level. This is a strategic goal that's defined in the framework of the policy cycle. Policy cycle, it's EU taxonomy. Every 4 years we define what are the priorities, what are the strategic goals we have to implement in Europe. So I'm responsible for that, which means that we are supported by Europol, but also Frontex. And I tried to have an overview of what every initiative related to the fight against document fraud, identity fraud in Europe and sometimes outside Europe, mainly in the direction of our neighboring countries. Western Balkan, Ukraine, and other Mediterranean countries. So I have a better picture because I'm not talking from a French point of view, but I have information coming both from Europol, Frontex, Interpol, that gives a quite extensive view, a good landscape view of what's the situation, the current situation. If you agree, I'll talk about two big topics, two main threats: document fraud, and the second growing and very concerning threat, which is the identity fraud. Then I'll tell you how we try to mitigate those two main tendencies and what we're doing. If we are successful, what are the efforts we can put to improve the situation. We start with document fraud. It has been something that's been going on for years and years. Yesterday during the dinner, one of my panelist colleagues spoke about Catch Me If You Can. And there are still few Catch Me If You Can guys. We arrested a very famous forger in the Gold Coast of Spain. I don't you call Costa
Brava, Costa.
Yeah. And this guy was really an artist, you know. He made, and he had his own marketing site showing a picture of Brad Pitt with a really nice French ID card. And he sold a lot of products, and this guy's won millions of euros selling his documents on the internet and bringing really high quality documents. And this is the main tendency. We have more and more high quality documents that are available in the market. And this is, we have less and less in Europe because I will tell you later, we try to identify them, arrest and stop them delivering false document to all kind of organized crime. The second big trend on document fraud is the fact that the precursors, the products needed to create false documents are produced in China. So China provides polycarbonate, they provide the security feature, everything you need to build false document. But they're not stupid enough to create false documents. So they give the precursor to Turkey at the moment, that's the trend. Turkey, those documents are put together, and then they are sent to Greece, where the personalization is done. Photo, personal data are printed, even laser printed on documents, which means that we have a really heavy tendency developing and a huge quantity of rather good quality document flowing to Europe. Those documents are mainly aiming at facilitating illegal immigration. However, we have seen a certain number of cases where those documents can be used to fool the financial institution, the banks, the insurance company, or small businesses, because, as I will say later, the big financial institutions have been already trying to mitigate this problem, and that they are less vulnerable than small businesses. Still, and I'll quote a third new tendency. I'll give you two examples and a third tendency. The example, the two documents, the most common false documents in Europe currently are the Romanian identity card, multi-purposes, Italian identity cards still, and French, they are still doing copies of the former model we had, which was not really safe. We have, of course, a new model of ID cards, which is really high quality and difficult to forge. I'd like to tell you about something very specific at the moment. You have genuine Russian documents that are supported with false visa. And you can clearly understand why. The current situation in the war between Ukraine and Russia, some people are trying to go away from Russia, and they are using false visa of very, very, very good quality. So that's something that you should keep in mind. So that's the picture, the current picture of the identity fraud, the document fraud, and we'll come to the identity fraud. The first tendency is that there are some networks of pickpockets all over Europe connected with organized crime organization, trying to steal genuine documents from American, German, French, English, whatever valuable passport, and they resell those documents to organized crimes organization and try to use it for multi-purposes, facilitating illegal immigration, but any kind of activities. The issue with that is that whatever your skills are, and there are skills around me to detect those fraud for the financial institution, is that they are genuine documents, which means that you're not very unlikely not to know if this passport is held by the right person. So that this is the first threat. The second threat, and I take this opportunity to tell you that there are shortcomings in the chain of delivery of genuine documents in Europe. Not in every country, but it's rather easy in some countries. I will not put the blame on specific country. I can speak about in my own country where we have problems with that. You can easily get a genuine identity travel documents, which means this person can be the right person or somebody else. They can use other people's identity. And I think it's going to be a major problem in the coming years to be able for you to detect those frauds and may jeopardize your activities. That's the two main threats I wanted to tell you about. How we mitigate that? For document fraud, I'm responsible for coordinating investigation of large scale at EU level, but outside EU too, to be able to search and destroy those print shops that creates documents. Unfortunately, I told you about Turkey. Our friends in Turkey are not accepting that we do some action there, which makes our life very complicated. They use small package like DHL, other organization like that, other postal delivery services, and it's very difficult to detect that. I have a specific partnership. I'm not going to elaborate because it's rather private, but we have a partnership with DHL at the moment. So we manage to track those packets, but we usually catch the small fish, the guys that are delivering in hairdresser, in every part where the small package are delivered, but they are really not the big game we are hunting every day. Not every day, but those investigations are financed by Europol, and we usually manage to stop 4 or 5 print shops per year. It's not a lot, but those are the most significant one, and I say it's less and less easy for those organizations to work in Europe. Outside Europe, it's another story, unfortunately. What I would like to tell you also is that...
Half a minute, Didier.
Yep. And that's...
No, he's setting the stage. I'm letting him speak on purpose, but watching the time.
It's finished. Just to tell you that we are working with the industry. I have, as my friend told you, we have a specific arrangement with them. I have an arrangement with a French company too. And we exchange intelligence to be able to track faster those who use those documents. And then I will come to the mitigation part of identity fraud. What I expect when I come here is that as you have influent position and you are some kind of a lobby towards the politicians, that the regulation at EU level impose a process of delivery of the genuine identity documents. Because if you want to support your digital identity, you have to use a safe physical identity. So if a message you should remember for what I said, please do some lobbying in the way that we have a regulation coming out imposing a very high standard in the chain of delivery of genuine documents. I'm on time.
Cool. Yeah. But thanks for that. And so the two main topics is fraud and AML. So we're sticking now a bit with fraud, as Didier mentioned on the document. How many financial institutions we have here? Can you raise hands? Banks? Okay, interesting. So obviously Didier catches the bad guys, destroyed the printing shop and stuff like this, but stuff does get through, and I want to move it to Krik. What steps organizations can take, and how are you working with your clients?
Yeah, I think DJ set the stage very well. I think the first and most important point is we're facing a formidable opponent. So if you look at financial crime, largest financial crime is money laundering. Money laundering alone is $1 trillion a year. So what DJ showed is the length that criminals will go through to obtain documents, but more importantly, to obtain bank accounts, which can then subsequently be used for money laundering and other types of financial crime. And I think we've made it our mission at Fourthline to fight financial crime, and we believe the only way to effectively do it is through technology. We can talk about it forever, but if you look at the way documents are set up, there's a lot of security features on there, and it requires a lot of expert knowledge to be able to properly identify an authentic document from a fake one. And I think, in all honesty, we cannot expect humans to do that and to train them. We can actually show objectively that technology is way better at that. So you can build AI models and train them to detect fake documents. You can also, which is much more complex, train AI models to detect authentic documents. So really identifying the security features, making sure that it's an authentic ID document. You can also leverage the chip in documents. Then the second point, which DJ tied into, what if it's an authentic document, but it's being used by someone other than on the document? That's where biometric verification comes in. Again, something that unfortunately humans are really, really bad at. And to make matters worse, they're really hard to train as well. So if you think about a human look at it, typically you have 7 seconds to decide whether it's the same person or not, and humans just fail it. There's a public test that you can take from Stanford University. If you think you're really good at it, take it. I was terrible at it. But the good news is AI is phenomenally good at detecting that. So that's the second element. But then, and I cannot go into all of the details, I think what we've seen is you need to look at a lot of data points in order to be able to fight off the criminals. And there's information you can retrieve on the device, on the whereabouts of a client, making sure that you properly screen them against sanction lists, which is something that will come up in this conversation as well. All in all, we run 200 checks at the onboarding process, but then very importantly, also have a range of products to monitor activity afterwards, because what we've also seen, and it's just another example of what DJ was saying, if criminals cannot go through in the proper way, what they will also do is pay money to other people, so-called money mules. So an authentic person with an authentic ID document will open a bank account. In principle, it's really hard to detect those cases, but subsequently someone else will start using that account. And we have ways to detect it. Many examples around accounts opened in Western Europe, but then subsequently accessed from Western Africa. Well, that may be a very adventurous traveler, but if you see activity in certain regions, you know something is going on. So I think that's the overarching point. But I think maybe to tie into what DJ was saying, and then I'll wrap up, is it's very important to understand that this is a problem of society. So ultimately, the reason that $1 trillion is being laundered is because, unfortunately, crime pays off at this moment in time. And we can do a lot with technology, but I think ultimately what needs to be done is you need to have public-private partnerships, which we invest in heavily. You also need to make sure that you look at this problem from a cross-border perspective. So the financial criminals will not be stopped by borders. So whatever you do, you need to take a look and a technology that can look across borders. So we also have a layer where we track patterns on a cross-border and cross-partner level, which is very important also to detect new ways of working. We've seen a rise in deepfakes, initially really bad quality, recently actually pretty high quality. We've seen the use of hyper-realistic silica masks, the one that you see in Mission Impossible. People actually will buy those to try and open accounts. And it's very important for all of the financial institutions to be able to tap into the knowledge of what's happening in the overall market, rather than just looking at the use cases within your own bank.
And Jaap, coming to you now. So they got through. Now the money laundering starts. How does a bank like ABN AMRO handle the process? And more interesting, personally, I'd like to know, how has the process evolved in the last 10 years, for example, where we have seen an exponential growth in technology and AI, for example?
Okay, thanks for the questions. First of all, we'll pretend here that they come true, but of course, like any bank, we also use the technology that Krik was just describing. There's several vendors out there that do this. We also partner with vendors that help us do the identification, the verification of electronically of documentation, and then there's several other controls in the onboarding process. But if someone becomes a client of a bank, then like any bank, there will be monitoring in place. Fraud monitoring specifically aimed at fraud. So the distinction between fraud and AML is there. To give a simple example, if someone through identity theft or through misrepresentation pretends to be a Dutch person but actually sits in I don't know, Bulgaria or somewhere outside the European Union. Once he's in the bank, he can apply for loans, credit cards, maximum draw under those loans and credit cards, and then we will never hear from them, from those people again. So they will actually defraud the bank of money. The money laundering piece could be a lot more complex, like mule accounts or otherwise allowing the account to be used to funnel money from one location to another, typically the layering process. So what we do on both fronts, fraud monitoring and AML monitoring, is to use first basic scenarios, threshold-based, looking for typologies. So to Sjoerd's point, typically focused on the typologies of crime or fraud and detect and through that generate alerts. Those alerts are then typically reviewed by human beings and may or may not result in a true case that is then worthwhile to follow up. Typically, those that kind of machinery is very inefficient, with up to 95% or more false positives. So a lot of work goes into discarding good behavior, basically, which was detected by the system as potentially bad behavior. So what has then changed, to answer that part of the question, is we use a lot more models, machine learning, AI. I won't get into the technical distinction between all of those technologies, but the self-learning aspect of some of the technologies, much more data-driven, using many more features than just the transaction and a threshold, but looking at up to 200, 250 features to build actually a framework of what good behavior, sometimes, but still also bad behavior looks like. And through that, working together with the old school scenarios that still generate alerts based on thresholds, we do suppression of false positives. So the human involvement comes a lot later. First, the model will look at the alerts and try to discard as many as possible, and then only the human analyst comes into play, and that increases false positive ratios to, or reduces false positive ratios to 50-60%, which is still a lot, but compared to the relatively old school way of working, an incredible efficiency gain. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll stop there and see if Sjoerd wants to supplement.
Let's go to Sjoerd. Yeah. How long have you been in transaction monitoring and AML?
I think 15, 20 years. So I think starting off with the first global frauds, handling also the cases where we were in a bank. I used to be a consultant before I started this company, so helping banks setting up the transaction monitoring. And I remember the days when I was in a project, we were stopping all the money flowing to Russia. And then, there was actually a guy physically going through all the transactions to Russia to check them one by one. And 1 or 2 weeks later, these guys through the network and a nice criminal, we know everybody, we have our own conferences. Within 2 weeks, they had money mules in Holland, and the money was flowing through some cities where you could just see which school, which coffee shop, the recruitment was happening. And so the whole control of Russia was suddenly just gone because the money was still flowing out, but just having a different direction. So that also taught me the lesson that indeed the idea of criminal typologies, because first of all they change, so whatever happens yesterday doesn't tell you a lot about what happens tomorrow. Second of all, to get a criminal typology you need crime, because otherwise you don't know what you're looking for. So you need a minimal number of crime actually in order to get that typology. And the good thing is, or the bad thing is, it's just hopefully it's a very small portion of your actual transactions. So on average, let's say 0.1% of your data is going to be criminal. The good thing is that means 99.9% of your data is actually non-criminal. So if you focus on that, you have far more data on it. It's more stable. And also, I think that what Krik was mentioning is that if you need to train a model on what's fraud, you need to sort of have fraud. You need to go with that, whether that's a document or whether that's a payment transaction, which is, so they've come through or they were already in, and then they are recruited for different purposes, and then they open their account for. If you focus on the non-fraud side, you can actually make sense of what's going on, because every investigator, every police officer will tell you once they look at it, well, we should have seen this one. This is just different than what you would expect. And when you focus on that, you can take out the false positives, because most of these parties, it may just make sense for them. This is what the business they do. They maybe do transactions to strange countries, but it just makes sense in their business model and what they've done historically or whoever they're interacting with. So you can reduce the false positive, but you can also detect the crime that you haven't seen before. So if you don't know the typology yet, you know one thing, it's going to be different than what a legitimate customer typically does. So, yeah.
How many transactions are we talking about? A bank roughly the size of ABN AMRO, what are we talking about?
So, I don't need to explain to the audience here that what is a bank is a very different. So, if you talk to a Landesbank here in Germany, or to ABN AMRO, or you're talking to Deutsche, or you're talking to BNP Paribas, or you're talking to a private bank in Luxembourg, or an asset manager who also does transactions, but just only very high value, low volume transaction. So, you can talk from 100,000, sometimes even just tens of thousands transactions a year if it's an asset manager, to billions of transactions when you're a large retail bank. Sometimes the billions of transactions in retail are just peanuts in terms of value when you compare it to a corporate bank or an asset manager or a private bank. So the number doesn't tell you much, but the point is the smaller, the retail bank has the benefit of, even if they would focus on a 0.1%, that would probably, unfortunately, still be a substantial number of transactions. When you're more in the private banking, asset management, corporate banking space, that 0.1% suddenly gets to individual use cases. So then you really want to switch it around. In retail, you also want to switch it around, but the smaller the numbers get, the more you have to switch it around to say, well, let's at least use the data of which I have most.
Yeah. Jaap mentioned, and we didn't practice this question, so please improvise. Jaap, you mentioned 95% false positives?
Or higher, yes.
Somebody would like to take this? I mean, unbelievable.
Well, yeah,
That's so inefficient, sounds to me.
It is inefficient, but I think for some scenarios where you are not able to develop a model, that is a reality. And I don't think, if I say for some scenarios 95% false positive, is actually far from the industry standard. Also, probably because banks that are under a lot of scrutiny. So there's different levels of scrutiny if you're coming out of a remediation situation, or you're still working towards a settlement with your local regulator or local government. You will be more cautious as to how far you want to take AI and experiment with that. It also depends on the local regulatory environment. I'd say in the Netherlands we're relatively lucky that the Dutch Central Bank, the main supervisor for AML for the financial services sector, is quite advanced in their thinking. They are allowing us to experiment with this. It's also for them sometimes difficult because it is very black box in its setup, and it becomes very technical quite quickly. But with the right testing, back testing, we can have the right dialogue with them, and that's fortunate. I know that not every country that's the same situation.
I think to add to that, I think it's to me a testament of the reputational and financial downside risk if you don't do a proper job. And we don't need to sort of highlight specific names, but a lot of banks found out the hard way that a regulator will step in, will issue fines, in some cases even earmark individual board members as a suspect. And I think keeping that in mind, if you compare to, well, we're close to the Frankfurt airport. If you compare to flight control at Frankfurt airport, they don't get any credits for doing their job well. But if it goes wrong one time, then everyone is all over them. And I think that's a little bit the analogy. There is so much downside risk of missing something that you'd rather look at those false positives than sort of risk losing out one time. And I think the effort that we've gone through, we've decided to only automate a check if we can objectively show, based on statistics, that the automated check outperforms a human. So we run them in parallel, and only after a period of time we'll flip the switch. But what that means in practice is that you need to invest a lot of money and you need to build up a lot of data before you can confidently say, okay, I'm willing to automate this check. And I think that's where sort of technology in many ways is still in its infancy into what you can actually unleash if you do this at very great scale. And we've seen it in recent months where sort of I gave the example of the masks. You can train specific models on that. But it does mean that you need to be really sure that it's detecting it before you can say that the Mission Impossible mask problem is gone.
Yep.
Yeah, I can confirm that the industry and companies like Fourthline are better than our first line border guard. I mean, when we have what we call Schengen evaluation, which means the capacity of member states to detect fraud at the external border of the EU, the results are not so good as the 99.9% of Fourthline. So my concern is to have our authorities keeping the same mindset and invest. And I would like also to add a word about the fact that we try to be proactive. I have the feeling that we have to try to think about what will be the future of fraud, and that's why we are currently building a consortium where Fourthline and other private companies are involved, where we'll study all the legal, technical aspects of the future of identity fraud. So we are trying to react also with the academics, with university. We have cases given by the law enforcement. So there is this approach which I like, very Anglo-Saxon, not very French, to be able to anticipate what will be the challenge of identity and digital identity in the future. I strongly hope European Commission will give us the ground to develop those activities.
Yeah, and I think maybe coming back to your question, I think on the false positive side. So I think there's indeed this downside risk that if you miss it, you're willing to take the costs. But the problem is, and I was in a call this morning with a customer, and their challenge is, like, we have 100 cases or 1,000 cases, and we're lucky if there's one thing true in there. So 95, I think, is indeed, for a lot of AML cases, it's above market standards. And so that not only means, of course, you have to take the cost, which is something you can make a consideration about. The problem is more, if you're letting your analyst go through 100 cases, the time they're really going to get a real case, what are the chances that they're actually going to make the right decision? Same thing with the passports or the ID cards. What is the chance that a human looking at 100 cases or 1,000 cases, when they actually have something going on, is still going to recognize them? Because they've just been clicking. So we see regulators more and more pushing for reasonable false positives, not only because of the cost side, because we need a viable financial industry, but also because of the human side, that if you have to look at too many alerts, you're not going to be able to distinguish the actual crime from the non-crime. And I think the good side in AI is that if you have a normal AI model, it's going to be quite a black box. So you're going to say it's going to be difficult to explain. I work a lot with compliance officers who don't have a data science background. Luckily, there's more and more compliance officers that sort of are interested in the field, but typically they have a legal background. So their talent is in a different direction, let's just say that. But what we do is you can use AI to come up with, in our case, the good typologies, but to come up with typologies that you can still understand, that you can still validate. You can not only backtest and statistically validate that the model is right, but as a human, you can actually also understand what typologies this is looking for. So you can use the AI to tell you what normally your expert intuition would have probably told you, because there's a lot of AI in our experts also, or not artificial, but actual intelligence. That does the same thing. They have a certain intuition to tell you, well, we think this is what crime looks like. And then the problem is it extrapolates to a lot of good customers because they do these type of things as well. But if you turn it around, you can use AI to actually come up with typologies that make sense. And then you can validate them as a non-data scientist as well.
Maybe to add one practical example, because I think this is sort of an example of the power of technology. What we encountered also is we screen clients against global sanction and politically exposed lists. And there the same thing occurs. So on average, within Europe, 7 to 8% of the clients signing up will trigger a potential hit on a sanction list. In some countries, like the UK and Spain, it can be as much as 20%, because you get the North American criminals in the case of the UK and the South American criminals in the case of Spain. So that generates a lot of alerts. And what we did in that case is we took a couple of million cases and just let our data science team go wild. And we actually asked them to look back and say, okay, what factors can we take into account? And how can we tweak a model to make sure that you never ever miss any of the confirmed hits, but you start eliminating the false positives automatically? And again, this is based on statistics. So making sure that you tweak it to a level where you'll not miss out. And we were able to reduce false positives actually with the 95%. So the other way around. Mm-hmm. So you only need to look at 5% of the cases. And I think then you tackle both of the concerns that Sjoerd is flagging, because it means you drastically reduce the number of man hours that is required to look into the false positives, but also out of that 5% that requires a manual check, there's a much bigger hit ratio. So it also means that the people who then look into it are very focused because they realize there's a very, very high degree that it's going to be a confirmed hit.
You want to add? This is an easy panel. Great. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to take it up a level, because also, Krik, you mentioned, if you look at it from a society perspective, crime is a cost to society. But I don't think we should forget that all the measures that we're implementing is a cost to society, right? For an individual to open a bank account, every false positive or every alert, I think we will do client outreach, or so ask questions to a client about a specific transaction or a number of transactions, and maybe 30-40% of the alerts, that is, most of them will then be closed as false positive, because most clients have perfectly fine behavior. It's just not something we understand on the back of just the numbers that are flowing through the account. So all that is a cost to society. You'll have to pick up the phone, you have to answer questions, you have to give us documents, you have to wait. Sometimes if you're a bit stubborn as a client, and we may actually we do need that information. Otherwise, we don't meet our requirements. So sometimes we get into a discussion with the client on the need for this. So it's all very cumbersome and time-consuming, and all that in the end is time, and time is not just money, it's also an inconvenience. So that cost to society is sometimes also, I think, underestimated. And that's why, it would be good if we work together, and companies like Fourthline and also what Sjoerd's doing will eventually make it more efficient. But I also think and so the second point I wanted to make on the back of this cost to society is also governments have a role to play here. And one of the things that is close to my heart is that in the Netherlands we have a digital identity system already, DigiID. It's all actually developed by the government, used by the government. You use it to file your tax application. Health insurance companies can use it for you to access your health insurance records, but banks are not allowed to use it. So we can't link through the digital identity environment with your permission, of course, and then you can use that information that's already with the government verified, completely secure from the source. So no need to route identity documents somewhere. It works at least for Dutch citizens, of course. For foreigners, we would still require something else. But those kind of conversations are very difficult. GDPR is the elephant in any room when you talk about fraud and AML and you want to do countermeasures, which is a valid topic. Of course, as democracies, we need to weigh one topic against the other. But it's still sometimes a pity that we don't have that government backing in this area more strongly. I don't know how it is in Germany. I don't know how it is in other countries, but it's something to ponder.
Mm-hmm. And I think just to add to that, I think the cost side, I think is on a financial cost side is of course big, and there's a lot of customer inconvenience. But we're also seeing, and I think especially in the US, that's a big topic. But I'm seeing it pop up more in Europe now as well. Is the ethical side. So we all know when you have risk typologies or crime typologies, certain types of business, certain type of groups of people are going to be hit more and having difficulty opening a bank account, having difficulty running their business or doing whatever they want to do. So the cost side has a financial aspect as well as an ethical aspect to it, because those false positives in the end are people and businesses. And I think that's we see a big debate going on right now. How do you reduce false positives in a responsible manner? But in order to make sure that you get the right people and don't sort of overreact to specific groups. And I think that also is a discussion that opens up for how to use AI machine learning properly, because that can really assist in getting the real risks out rather than sort of the biased typologies that people have defined over time.
You mentioned a bit, Jaap, how is it in Germany? So I've been here 10 years. I meet about 2 banks every day. 10 banks a week, 40 banks a month. You can make the numbers. The idea is to share information. I do come from Israel, so I know what's going on in the cyberspace and stuff like this. So a CISO would always want to meet with me. But the main thing is also to find out what are the difficulties and where are the budgets. And the moment a regulation is coming in, MiFID II, 2019, I think, or something, the budgets, boom, 80% of their budgets, MiFID II compliance, they're all there. I know because my living is to bring fintechs and regtechs to Frankfurt. I go look for these automation of MiFID II compliance because they have budgets. What I do see is that a lot of these budgets go on personnel rather than tech. I want to know now, I'm not putting anyone on the spot, how does a bank see it and how difficult is it for you guys to work with financial institutions, with banks? And have you managed to work with German banks? That's my niche.
Shall I go first? I think working and selling into banks is very cumbersome. So for the ones that work with the bank, you're probably familiar with the lovely vendor onboarding process of your financial institution, which usually consists of a Excel questionnaire with at least 400 questions. I'm not kidding. I was once asked to provide a picture of our fire extinguisher in the office as proof to be able to work with the bank. You can laugh at it, but it's actually sort of, if you think about the cost to society, I don't know whether that was time well spent. But I think the one advantage we have had is we're a regulated financial institution ourselves. So in many cases, we understand what they're looking for. We understand that it's not because they want us to provide that, it's because it's actually a hard regulatory requirement. So what has really helped us is being able to show that you have all of these policies in place yourself because you're a regulated financial institution. I think the point around sort of personnel versus technology, and that's why I said it's in its infancy. I think we can show it based on statistics. We have an external company, Forrester, looked into it as well. There's no doubt that this is more efficient. I think the key question that is on the mind of the banks that we talk to is quality. Quality is the first point, because they first want to know whether you're actually better than what they have in place. And that means that from a budget perspective, it's very important to be able to, rather than a flashy sales pitch, actually be able to show the financial institution how you do it. And it ties in with the point Sjoerd was making. The good news is that's also the way the regulator views it. So to Jaap's point, I think the Dutch Central Bank is very open to technology, but other regulators in Europe, I spend a lot of time speaking to them, are actually way more open than people think. They just don't like it if you tell them, here's my fantastic black box. I'm not going to tell you what happens inside, but it's pure magic. So that doesn't work. So what does work is actually opening the kimono. Talk them through the way you've built your models. To Sjoerd's point, tell them how you tackle bias, how you tackle financial inclusion in a positive way. And I think that's the way forward, because ultimately, if we implement something that is maybe efficient but at low quality or at a too big cost to society because you're excluding people, that will not work. So we need to build something that brings long-term value, both to the financial institution we're selling into, is acceptable to the regulator, but also solves the problem of society at large. And to your last point, yes, we also work with German banks. So in the end, I'm a fundamental optimist. I believe that sort of there's a will to win here, and the fact that banks have hired thousands of people to solve the problem, to me, is music to my ears, because it means we can do more business.
Yep. And then Sjoerd.
So I want to repeat that we use this technology in various stages, but usually when big programs happen, and again when there's pressure of remediation, so things were not working so well in the past, you get into a settlement quarrel with your regulator or even public prosecutor after an examination. Then there's also the speed to react, and sometimes and quite often there is the throwing people at a problem is then actually the best way forward. Don't also forget that we have a lot of existing clients. We're not a new bank. No one ever has a new bank.
Full disclosure, I'm a client. So. Yeah.
Well, thank you. But at the same time, pretty much every bank will now have a straight-through onboarding for its retail customers. But that doesn't mean we also sit on so ABN AMRO Bank has roughly 5.5 million clients, predominantly in the Netherlands. There's a fair portion of those, and that's in several hundreds of thousands that have no digital interaction with the bank. They simply do not use, other than the ATM, they do not use the app and they do not use electronic banking. And this is where you get into the public utility situation or not perception. We are to a certain extent a public utility because offering payment services to individuals and increasingly also legal entities is considered a necessity to participate in social economic activity. So that means we cannot just force those people on an app or on an internet banking application. So that's a challenge, right? So, and then again, don't forget MiFID II comes in, new AML regulation comes in, particularly if the change is significant and the regulator wants some remedial action for existing clients. And sometimes you have to pick up the phone, and that's human work. It can't all be done by technology. Yeah. But I'm happy to stand corrected, and if you guys have bright ideas for the...
Well, I think it's the handshake between human experts and technology, and I think so. A lot of times, and because I've been in these projects before as well, and sometimes there's quick wins you can do with human experts that know exactly what's going on. The challenge comes in when it's skill. So if you have multiple countries, multiple business lines, all local requirements, local different customer data, and we're talking to banks, and I think we are seeing this problem of when is it a human sort of solution, and when do you use technology? Because if you're recruiting data scientists, and I talk to banks and say, well, we just hired 100 data scientists, and I think all of us know if you hire 100 data scientists, first of all, good luck finding them. Second of all, be very happy if you have 10 really good ones and the other 90 probably keeping each other busy. So it's not a scalable solution because you don't have in your bank, you don't have 100 really, well, you have probably 100 experts, but on like 200 different topics. So really getting an individual expert or a couple of experts who really know how to solve a problem, that's manageable. But when you're talking skill on like global organizations or a lot of local requirements, you need something that's scalable. And so that's also why we said, well, let's build the technology to automate that data science process, because then you can, on an ongoing basis, and we see this, the US is coming with regulations on not only making models, but keeping them, evaluating them, keeping them up to date. So let's go through a 2-year project with 50 data scientists to build a model. Great, you can do that. But then next year you have to do it again because you have to reevaluate the model, make all the evaluations again, and then the next year afterwards. So in crisis situations, a human solution is very strong. But at some point, I think we've learned in the banking world that financial crime right now is well, it's a crisis, but it's sort of an ongoing crisis. So at some point, you need to have technologies in place for specific areas so that your experts can really focus on the thing where the expert makes sense. And I think also with the identity thing, use technology to sort of take out the big chunks so that your experts can really focus on the really expert-driven thing. And then you can really build up human expertise in specific areas where they really make sense.
I'm really limited on time. I do want to give the floor a minute to Didier as a last statement, and each of you can also follow up with a final statement. But Didier, you have organizations here. What would you say are the best practices for them to follow?
Well, don't do what the French administration is doing. Relying only on human resources, because the rate of detection is very low if you rely only on men. That's as simple as that. But again, the winning combination is both. Do the core business. I mean, the big amount of checking is done by IA. That's what we're developing and what I'm doing in my field of activity. And then let's put the expert to finalize and identify where are the real big threats. We'll not be able to cope with every crime, every kind of crook, but we have to be supported by IA, which is very, very limited at the moment. Things are changing, but slowly. You're lucky, because you have resources and you have companies that are already doing a great job. But we're helping them a bit too.
Final word, Krik, and then Jaap, and then Sjoerd.
So maybe tying in on both what Sjoerd and Didier said, I think I agree. So let me be very clear. I don't think technology solves everything, but I think ultimately what you want to have is a solution that's both very high quality, scalable, to Jaap's point, at the lowest cost possible to society. But the human comes in a very important aspect, because the ethical part of AI is becoming very, very important. So it means that if you go back to sort of the British TV series Little Britain, computer says no, that's what we want to avoid. So I think I'm a big fan of the computer says yes. So we've checked you thoroughly. There's nothing to worry about. You can be accepted. But in case we're rejecting a person, or if we're saying this person is fraudulent, then we want the machine to flag it, but we will have the human as backfall. And that's why we have our own operations team to, if you have such an impactful decision, to not just rely on the machine.
30 seconds.
Then I'll wrap up, and I thank you very much for being here. I think this is a super interesting topic. It has been for a long time, and it will continue to be for a long time as well.
Sjoerd, one final word.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, thanks for the conversation, discussion. But I think also, indeed, AI is nice, but it's a combination of human and AI, and it's really about AI that's explainable, understandable, and we always say comprehensible. Somebody needs to be able to comprehend how the decision is being made. Not just I can statistically prove it, but also I can actually understand what metrics are there, so I can validate biases and things like that.
Very good. So for a conference like this to be really successful is really to get to know who's here. I'm sure you're very relevant people for them to speak with, for me to speak with. We're going to be just outside there. Please come and connect, and let's make Frankfurt Digital Finance a good place to connect. Thank you guys. It was a great panel, and enjoy the rest of the day.